I found the account in a sealed archive on a world that no longer has a name, and I have spent the better part of my life trying to understand it, and I am going to tell it to you the way it was told to me, by a creature long dead, in a record that should not have survived, about a mistake my entire civilization is still paying for. I am called Sevet. I am of the Vire, a student of histories, and I want to be honest with you from the start. This is not a story about a war. There was no war. That is the thing that makes it unbearable. Everything that broke, broke quietly, and the regret. The title is right about this. It is the truest word in it. The regret came too late, because by the time anyone understood what had been lost, the ones who could have stopped it were already gone. To tell it, I have to tell you about the choir. And to tell you about the choir, I have to make you feel a thing my people no longer feel, because we lost it, and the losing is the whole of this story. The choir was what we called the Galactic Order in those days, and it was not a council the way you might imagine a council, not a table, not delegates, not speeches. The choir was a thing far stranger and, we believed, far more beautiful. The species of the near reach, most of them, were empaths. We felt one another. Not perfectly, not telepathy as the old stories have it, but truly. A Vire in a room with a Threnar could feel the shape of the Threnar's mood, the texture of its wanting, the weather of its heart. And across millions of years, the empath species had learned to govern themselves through this. Not by voting, not by law, by consensus of feeling. When a decision had to be made, the choir would gather, physically or across the resonance networks that spanned the reach, and they would feel together, all of them, until the feeling of the whole settled into one shared shape, and that shape was the decision. No argument, no faction, no winner and loser. Just the slow, beautiful settling of a million hearts into a single chord. We were proud of it, the way you are proud of the highest thing your kind has ever made. We thought the choir was the end of conflict itself. Other civilizations, the ones we knew of from the deep histories, had governed through force or law or fear or wealth, and all of those had failed. All of those had ended in blood, because all of those were ways of managing disagreement, and a thing that manages disagreement still contains the disagreement, still has the seed of the next war inside it. The choir did not manage disagreement. The choir dissolved it. When a million hearts feel together until they become one feeling, there is no disagreement left to manage. There is only the chord. We had not ended conflict by suppressing it. We had ended it by feeling our way past it every time into unity. Or so we believed. For a very long time, so we believed. And then there were the humans. The humans could not feel us. That was the first thing anyone noticed about them, and it was, to the choir, a kind of tragedy. They were empath blind. A human in a room with a Vire felt nothing of the Vire's heart, and the Vire felt nothing of the humans, or rather, the Vire felt something, but it was closed, opaque, a shape with no inside, a presence that gave nothing back. The choir had never met a species like this. Every other people of the reach, however different, however strange, could be felt, could be joined, could add their heart to the chord. The humans could not. They stood outside the resonance entirely, locked in their separate skulls, each one a sealed room that no feeling could enter or leave. We pitied them at first. To be unable to feel the hearts around you, to be alone inside yourself, sealed away from the great warm chord of all living things. What could be lonelier? What could be more broken? We did not understand, for a long time, that the thing we pitied was the thing that would save us, and that our pity was the beginning of the mistake. Because here is what the humans could do that we could not, and it took my civilization generations to understand it, and the creature whose account I found understood it before almost anyone, which is why I have spent my life on her record. The humans could disagree. Truly disagree. Two humans could hold opposite feelings, opposite wants, opposite truths, and not dissolve them, not resolve them, not feel their way past them into a chord. They could simply hold them, side by side in tension indefinitely without the tension destroying either of them, because they were sealed. Because each human heart was its own closed room, A human could carry a disagreement the way you carry a stone in your pocket, present and unresolved and survivable for a lifetime if need be. They argued. They held opposing views. They built whole institutions, courts, debates, parliaments, the strange, noisy machinery of a people who had never once felt a chord, designed not to dissolve disagreement but to live inside it, productively, forever. To the choir, this looked like brokenness. It looked like the absence of the thing that made us beautiful. We saw a species that could not achieve unity, could not settle into the chord, could only argue and never resolve, and we thought, how sad, how primitive, how lonely. We did not see what the creature in the archive saw, what almost no one in the choir saw until it was too late. We did not see that the ability to hold a disagreement without dissolving it is not a flaw. It is a power. It is, in fact, the one power the choir did not have and could not have and would discover, far too late, that it could not survive without. Let me tell you what the humans became to the choir, because this is the thing the title means. This is the load they carried that we never named. The choir governed by consensus of feeling, and consensus of feeling has a flaw, a single deep flaw that no empath species had ever been able to see because seeing it requires standing outside the chord, and only the human stood outside the chord. The flaw is this: a consensus of feeling cannot tolerate a feeling that will not join. When a million hearts settle into one chord, the chord is beautiful. But what happens to the heart that does not want to settle? The heart that feels, truly and rightly, that the chord is wrong. In the choir, such a heart had only two options. It could surrender its feeling and join the chord, dissolving its own truth into the unity. Or it could be felt by everyone as the one discordant note in the great harmony, and the pressure of a million hearts wanting it to resolve, wanting the discomfort of its discord to end, was a pressure no empath could withstand for long. The chord did not argue with dissent. The chord simply made dissent unbearable by feeling until the dissenter resolved or broke. We called this peace. We called it harmony. And it was, for the easy decisions, the decisions where the right chord was obvious and everyone wanted to settle into it. But for the hard decisions, the ones where the truth was uncomfortable, where the right answer was the one the chord did not want to feel, where a minority was right and the majority was wrong, the choir had no defense at all. It would simply settle, every time, into the most comfortable chord, the one that felt best to the most hearts, and it would feel the dissenters into silence, and it would call the result consensus, and it would never know what it had lost, because the lost thing was precisely the feeling no one wanted to keep feeling. And then the humans came, and the choir, almost by accident, discovered what they were for. A human could not be felt into silence. A human, sealed in its separate skull, could stand in the middle of the great chord and hold the discordant feeling, the uncomfortable truth, the minority that was right, and feel nothing of the million hearts pressing on it to resolve, because the human could not feel the pressure at all. The thing that had looked like the human's tragic flaw, their empath blindness, their loneliness, made them the only creatures in the reach who could disagree with a consensus and not be dissolved by it. And so the choir began slowly, without ever quite deciding to use the humans for exactly that. When a decision was too hard, when the chord wanted to settle somewhere the truth said it should not, the humans were brought in, not to vote, they had no vote, but to hold, to carry the disagreement. To be the sealed room where the uncomfortable feeling could survive the pressure of the chord long enough for the chord to actually reckon with it, instead of just feeling its way past it into the comfortable lie. The humans became the choir's conscience, its loyal opposition, the keepers of every truth the chord did not want to feel. For generations, every hard decision in the reach passed through human hands, not because the humans ruled, they never ruled, but because the humans were the only ones who could hold the reach's disagreements open long enough for the disagreements to be resolved honestly instead of comfortably. They were the friction that kept the consensus honest. They were the grit in the chord that made it more than a pretty sound. And the choir never thanked them for it, never honored them for it, because the choir never understood it. The choir went on pitying the humans for their empath blindness, their loneliness, their inability to join the chord, right up until the day the choir decided, out of that same pity, to fix them. That is the mistake. That is the whole of it. That is the thing my civilization is still paying for. The creature whose account I found was present for the decision, and her record of it is the most painful document I have ever read, because she saw what it would do, and she felt it coming, and she could not stop it, because she was one vire heart in a chord of 1,000,000, and the chord had already begun to settle. Her name, the part of it I can render, was Ilith. She was a resonance keeper, one of those who tended the networks across which the choir felt itself, and so she felt the whole reach the way most of us felt only a room. She felt the chord settling toward the decision before the decision was even spoken, and in her account she describes the feeling with a precision that has haunted me for years. She wrote that the chord wanted to fix the humans the way a body wants to remove a splinter, not out of cruelty, out of the deep automatic longing of a unity to be complete, to have no discordant note, to feel every heart in the reach joined at last in the great warm chord. The humans were the one people who could not join. And the choir, feeling its way toward completeness the way it always did, settled into the chord that said, "We will make them able to join. We will fix what is broken in them. We will give them what we have. We will end their loneliness and complete our unity, both at once, and it will be a mercy." They had developed the means. That is the part that makes it real. It was not a metaphor. The choir's deep sciences had found a way to open the sealed human mind, to alter what made humans empath blind, to bring them into the resonance, to let them feel the chord and be felt by it at last. They proposed it as the highest gift the choir could give, an end to human loneliness, an invitation into the unity, the completion of the great chord with the last people who had ever stood outside it. And the chord settled toward it, 1,000,000 hearts warming to the beauty of it, the mercy of it, the wholeness of it, and only a few hearts, Ilith's among them, felt the wrongness underneath, and could not make the wrongness heard, because the chord does not argue with dissent. The chord only feels it into silence, and the dissenters were empaths, and empaths cannot hold a discordant feeling against the pressure of 1,000,000 hearts. There was only one people in the reach who could have held that disagreement open, who could have stood in the middle of the warming chord and refused to resolve, and felt none of the pressure, and forced the choir to actually reckon with what it was about to do instead of feeling its way past it into the comfortable mercy. The humans. And the decision was about the humans. And so, for the first time in the history of the choir, the one people who could have held the reach's disagreement open were the very people the disagreement was about, and they were not asked to hold it. They were the subject of the chord, not its keepers. The choir, settling toward the mercy of fixing the humans, did not bring the humans in to hold the disagreement, because it never occurred to the choir that this decision needed holding. It felt like mercy. It felt like completeness. It felt good to 1,000,000 hearts, and the choir had never in its history learned to distrust a thing that felt good to 1,000,000 hearts, because the humans had always been there to distrust it for them, and the humans were not in the room. Ilith felt the chord settle. She felt the decision become consensus. And then she did the only thing left to her, the thing her account is built around, the thing that I crossed half a lifetime of archives to understand. She left the resonance networks in body alone, and she went to the humans, to the human quarter of the great choir world, where the sealed lonely people lived among us and held our disagreements and were pitied for it. And she told them what the choir had decided to do to them. And the humans listened. And the humans, who could hold any disagreement open forever, who could feel none of the chord's beautiful pressure, who were the only people in the reach capable of simply saying no and meaning it and not dissolving, the humans heard that the choir had decided, out of love, to reach into their sealed minds and open them, to end their separateness, to make them part of the chord whether they willed it or not. Because the chord had felt its way to the conclusion that this was a mercy, and the chord did not know how to be told no. And the humans told the choir no. Not with violence. The humans never raised a hand. They told the choir no the only way a people who hold disagreements can tell you no, completely calmly, without dissolving, without resolving, an answer that would not settle into any chord. They said, "You may not open our minds. You may not end what makes us ourselves, even as a mercy, even out of love. We would rather keep our loneliness than lose the thing our loneliness protects. And if the price of staying in your choir is that you will eventually, lovingly, feel your way to fixing us, then we will not stay in your choir. We will walk away." Eilith's account records the moment the human said it, and she records what she felt. And it is the last thing I will tell you before the part of the story where everything comes apart. She wrote that, when the humans said they would walk away, the chord did not understand it as a threat. The chord could not understand it as a threat, because the chord did not know what the humans were for. To the chord, the humans leaving meant only that a small, lonely, pitied people would go off to be lonely somewhere else, and the great warm unity of the reach would go on, complete in every way that mattered, minus only the one discordant note it had always wished would resolve. The chord felt relief, Eilith wrote, relief. The discord was leaving. The unity would be pure at last. Eilith felt the relief of a million hearts, and underneath it she felt the truth that only she and a few others could feel, the truth the humans had always held for us and were now taking with them out the door. And she wrote it in her account in words I have carried ever since, the words that are the reason this story exists. They think the humans are the splinter. They are about to learn the humans were the hand that knew which splinters to leave in. I want to slow down here before the leaving and tell you about the human quarter as Eilith recorded it, because she went there in those last days, again and again, and her descriptions are the closest thing my civilization has to a memory of what we threw away. We do not have such memories anymore. That is part of what was lost. So I will give you hers. The human quarter on the great choir world was a strange place to an empath, and Eilith wrote that she had avoided it for most of her life, the way most of us avoided it, not out of dislike, but out of a low, constant discomfort, the discomfort of a feeling creature in a place full of beings it could not feel. To walk through the choir's own districts was to move through a warm bath of sensed hearts, a constant gentle awareness of every mood around you, the texture of the crowds feeling like air on the skin. To walk into the human quarter was to walk into silence, not quiet silence. The hearts went dark. The warm bath drained away, and you were suddenly alone inside your own skull, in a way an empath almost never experienced, surrounded by beings who gave nothing back, sealed rooms walking, 100 lonelinesses that could not touch. Most of us found it unbearable and left quickly. Eilith, in those last days, made herself stay, and she wrote down the thing she discovered when she stopped fleeing the silence, the thing that changed her, the thing that almost no empath in the history of the choir had ever let themselves feel long enough to understand. The silence was not empty. It only seemed empty to a creature addicted to feeling everything. When Eilith made herself stand in the human quarter and stop reaching out for the hearts that would not answer, she began, slowly, to notice what the humans had built in the space where the chord was not. They had built conversation. Real conversation, the kind that can only exist between beings who cannot feel each other, who therefore have to actually tell each other things, who cannot simply resonate their way to mutual understanding but must do the slow, careful work of words, of explaining, of being misunderstood and trying again. Eilith had never heard real conversation before. In the choir, you did not explain yourself. You were felt. Why would you struggle to put a feeling into words when the other could simply feel it? The choir had no conversation because the choir had no need of it. And so the choir had lost, or never developed, the entire art the humans lived inside. The art of reaching across a gap that cannot be closed, of building understanding deliberately, brick by spoken brick, between two beings who will always, finally, be separate. She watched two humans disagree. She wrote pages about it. To an empath, disagreement was a kind of pain, a discord to be resolved as fast as possible, and Ilith had expected the human disagreement to be ugly, violent, the primitive friction of beings who could not feel their way to harmony. It was not. It was, she wrote, the most beautiful thing she had ever witnessed, and she did not have words for why until she had watched it many times. Two humans, holding opposite truths, and instead of dissolving the difference, instead of one surrendering to the chord of the other, they stayed. They held their separate truths and they talked, and the talking did not erase the difference. The talking honored it, examined it, turned it over. And at the end the two humans still disagreed and were somehow closer for it, richer for it, each carrying away a piece of the other's truth that they could hold alongside their own without having to dissolve either one. They had made something out of the disagreement that was larger than either position. The choir, dissolving every disagreement into the comfortable chord, had never once made that larger thing. The choir had only ever made agreement. The humans made understanding, which is a different and a harder and a vastly more valuable thing, and they made it precisely because they could not feel each other, because the gap forced them to do the work the chord let everyone skip. Ilith understood, standing in that silence, that the choir had had it exactly backwards for 1,000,000 years. We had pitied the humans for their separateness. But separateness was the precondition of everything that mattered. You cannot have understanding without two separate beings to understand each other across a gap. You cannot have real conversation without the gap that makes words necessary. You cannot hold a disagreement open, cannot keep a truth alive against the pressure of the crowd, unless you are sealed enough that the crowd's pressure cannot reach in and dissolve you. The human's loneliness was not a wound. It was a room. A sealed room in which a single heart could keep a single truth safe from the warm, devouring unity of 1,000,000 other hearts. And the choir had decided to unseal every one of those rooms, out of love, and call it mercy. And it never once understood that it was proposing to demolish the only structures in the reach where an unpopular truth could survive. Ilith tried to bring this to the chord. Her account is unflinching about her own failure, and I honor her for that, because it would have been easy to write herself as a hero who tried and was thwarted. She does not. She writes that she tried and that she failed, and that the failing taught her exactly what the humans were for by showing her, in her own body, the thing the humans could do that she could not. She entered the resonance with her truth, the truth that fixing the humans would destroy the only thing holding the choir honest, and she tried to hold it against the chord. And the chord, settling warm toward its merciful conclusion, felt her discord, and it did not argue with her because the chord never argues. It simply pressed. 1,000,000 hearts, each one wanting the discomfort of her discordant feeling to end, each one radiating the gentle, overwhelming pressure of a unity that longs to be complete. And Ilith, an empath, a feeling creature, felt that pressure the way you would feel the weight of an ocean, and she held her truth for as long as she could, and then she could not. No empath could. The pressure of 1,000,000 hearts wanting you to resolve is not an argument you can win, because it is not an argument at all. It is a feeling, and you are made of feeling, and you cannot hold a feeling the whole chord wants gone any more than you can hold your breath against the need to breathe. She dissolved. Her truth dissolved. She felt herself settle, against her own will, into the comfortable chord, and she felt the relief of joining, the awful sweetness of stopping the struggle, the warm welcome of the unity closing over the place where her dissent had been. And she hated it, and she could not resist it. And that, she wrote, was the moment she finally understood the humans all the way down. They could have held it. A human, standing where she stood, feeling nothing of the chord's pressure, could have held that truth open forever. Not because humans were braver than Vire, or wiser or better, because they were sealed. Because the ocean of 1,000,000 hearts could not reach into a human skull, and so a human could keep saying no while every empath in the reach was helplessly, lovingly, dissolving into yes. The humans were not the conscience of the choir because they were more moral than us. They were the conscience of the choir because they were the only ones the choir could not silence by feeling at them. Their loneliness was our last defense against ourselves, and we had decided to cure it, and the only people who could have stopped us were the people we had decided to cure. So Ilith, defeated in the resonance, dissolved back into the chord against her will, did the only thing left. She left the resonance in body, alone, carrying a truth she could no longer hold inside the chord but could still, just barely, hold inside her own sealed-off solitary skull when she was far enough from the networks. And she carried it to the humans, because they were the only ones who could hold it for her, the only ones strong enough in the one way that mattered. She went into the silence of the human quarter, into the place where the chord could not reach, and there, alone, away from the pressure, she was able to say the true thing one more time, out loud in words the human way, to beings who could not feel her but could, if she did the work, understand her. And the humans understood. That is the thing I hold on to, the small mercy in the whole bitter account. In the last days, when no empath in the reach could keep the truth alive against the chord, one Vyre carried it on foot into the one place the chord could not go, and spoke it the slow, hard human way to the only people who could receive it, and they understood completely, and they did not dissolve it, and they held it and they acted on it, the only way they could. They walked away. Ilith was there when they went. Her account of the leaving is short. She says she could not write much of it, that some things resist the words even of a people learning at last to use them. But what she wrote is the hinge of everything, and I will give it to you as she gave it. And then I will leave part one there in the doorway, with the humans going out and the chord feeling relief and one Vyre heart understanding, too late and alone, exactly what was walking out the door. She wrote, I watched them go, and the chord around me sang with relief, a million hearts glad the discord was leaving, glad the unity would be pure. And I stood in the relief I could not share, holding the one truth I could no longer hold, and I understood that I was feeling the last of it, the last disagreement the choir would ever be able to keep. They were taking it with them. Every uncomfortable truth, every unpopular rightness, every splinter the choir had needed to keep, but never had the strength to keep itself. It walked out the door in sealed and lonely skulls, and the chord called it relief, and I called it the end, and there was no one left who could hold the difference between those two feelings open long enough for the choir to learn which one was true. That is where part one ends. The humans gone, the chord pure and warm and complete at last, relieved of its last discordant note, certain it had lost nothing because it could no longer feel the thing it had lost. And one Vyre heart, alone, holding a truth it could not keep, watching the door close on the only people who could have kept it. In part two, I will tell you what happened to a galaxy that finally got the pure, unchallenged consensus it had always wanted. What happens to a chord when there is no longer any grit in it, no friction, no one who can hold a disagreement open, no sealed room anywhere in the reach where an unpopular truth can survive the warm pressure of a million hearts who would all, lovingly, prefer not to feel it. It is not a story of collapse. I told you that at the start. Nothing broke loudly. That is the horror of it. A consensus with nothing to challenge it does not break. It simply gets more and more comfortable and more wrong, and there is no longer anyone in the entire reach who is able to feel the difference, because the people who could feel the difference were never empaths at all. They were the lonely ones, and we had finally, mercifully set them free. I have to tell you the hardest part of the whole account now, and it is hard because there is no villain in it and no disaster in it and nothing you can point to and say there. That is where it went wrong. The going wrong had already happened. It happened in the doorway in part one, when the last people who could hold a disagreement walked out of it. Everything in part two is just the consequence, unspooling slowly across years, and the slowness is the cruelty, because a fast catastrophe at least lets you grieve in real time. This was not fast. This was a civilization getting more and more comfortable and more wrong, by degrees too fine to feel, and Ilith lived through all of it, and her account becomes, in these years, less a record of events than a record of a single heart trying to feel a thing the whole reach had lost the ability to feel. For the first while, nothing happened and the nothing was celebrated. That is in the account, and it is the part that hurts most to read. The chord, purified of its last discord, settled into a harmony deeper and warmer than it had ever known. The decisions that had once been hard, the ones that used to pass through human hands, that used to take generations of friction to resolve honestly, now resolved instantly, sweetly, the whole reach settling into agreement faster than ever before because there was no longer anything to slow the settling. The choir experienced this as a flowering, a golden age. Eilith records the public feeling of those first years, the shared joy of a unity finally complete, a million hearts singing in a chord with no grit in it, and she records her own horror at being the only one who could feel that the smoothness was not health, but the absence of resistance. The way a body with no pain feels wonderful right up until it sits down on something that is burning it. Because the decisions did not stop being hard, the hardness was still there in the world, in the actual problems the reach had to solve. What stopped was the choir's ability to feel the hardness. A hard decision is hard because there is a true answer the crowd does not want, an uncomfortable rightness that has to be held against the comfortable wrongness everyone would prefer. The humans had held those. With the humans gone, the hard decisions did not become easy, they became invisible. The chord simply settled into the comfortable answer every time, instantly, joyfully, and never felt the true answer it was settling past, because the only ones who had ever been able to keep the true answer present were the lonely sealed people now living somewhere far away in their own quiet worlds. The choir was not solving its hard problems well. It had lost the ability to know which of its problems were hard. Every decision felt easy now, because every dissent dissolved instantly, and a civilization in which every decision feels easy is not a wise civilization. It is a blind one, walking confidently, because it can no longer feel the edge of anything. Eilith gives an example in her account, and I will give it to you, because the abstraction is too easy to nod along to, and the example is where it becomes real. There was a world, she does not name it. The naming records of that era are themselves a casualty of this story, a world of one of the smaller empath peoples, and that world was failing. Some slow ecological wound, the kind of thing that takes a generation to kill a biosphere. The right answer was hard and expensive and uncomfortable. The whole reach would have to divert enormous resources, change long-settled patterns, accept real loss, to save a small people most of the choir barely felt in the great chord. In the old days, this is exactly the kind of decision the humans would have held open. A small, distant suffering, easy for a million comfortable hearts to feel their way past. The humans would have stood in the middle of the chord and refused to let it resolve, held the dying world's truth present and undissolvable, until the choir actually reckoned with it instead of settling sweetly into the comfortable conclusion that it was sad but not worth the cost. There were no humans. The chord felt the dying world's distress briefly as a discord, and then, with no one to hold it, the discord dissolved. Not callously. That is the thing Eilith insists on, and it is the thing that makes it unbearable. The chord did not coldly decide the small people were not worth saving. The chord felt their suffering genuinely, and then felt its way past it, into the warm, comfortable consensus that the cost was simply too high, that the loss was regrettable but necessary, that the reach had done all it reasonably could. And the chord believed this sincerely, with a million sincere hearts, because there was no longer anyone able to keep the other truth alive against the sincere, comfortable warmth. The small world died. The choir grieved it sincerely, and moved on sincerely, and never once felt that it had made a choice it could have made differently, because the alternative truth had dissolved before it could become a choice. A people died because the galaxy had lost the one species that could hold a hard truth still long enough to be looked at. And this happened again, and again, not as catastrophe as weather, a slow erosion of every uncomfortable rightness across the whole reach, each instant small, each instant sincerely grieved and sincerely moved past, the chord growing warmer and more unanimous and more sincerely, comfortably, invisibly wrong with every passing year. Ilith's account becomes a litany of these in the middle years, and I will not give you all of them, because the accumulation is the point, and you can feel it accumulating. A justice not done because the wronged party's truth dissolved against the comfort of the crowd. A warning not heeded because heeding it felt bad, and there was no one to make the bad feeling stay. A cruelty not stopped because stopping it was hard, and the chord, with nothing to hold it honest, settled sweetly into the easier feeling that it was not really cruelty, not really, when you felt the whole situation together. The choir was not becoming evil. It was becoming something worse, something there is barely a word for. It was becoming a vast, sincere, comfortable agreement that had lost all contact with the truths that did not feel good. And it could not tell, it genuinely could not tell, because the instrument that would have told it had walked out the door in sealed and lonely skulls. Ilith tried in those years to be the human. She writes about this with a self-honesty that breaks my heart every time I read it. She thought, if the problem is that no one can hold a disagreement against the chord, then I will hold it. I will be the grit. I will be the sealed room. And she tried, again and again, entering the resonance with each uncomfortable truth as it arose, planting herself in the middle of the warming chord and refusing to dissolve. And every time she failed, for the reason she had already learned in part 1 and had to keep learning, because the failing was not a thing you learn once. She was an empath. She felt the chord. And you cannot hold a feeling against a million hearts that want it gone when you are made of the same stuff they are, when their wanting reaches into you and becomes your wanting, when the pressure to resolve is not outside you arguing but inside you dissolving. She would hold for a moment, an hour, a day. And then the warmth would close over her, and she would feel the awful sweet relief of joining, and she would settle, and the truth would be gone, and she would come back to herself afterward sick with the knowledge that she had failed again, that she could not be what the humans had been, that no empath could, that the thing the reach needed was precisely the thing the reach was constitutionally incapable of producing from within itself. That was the trap. That was the whole trap, and Ilith saw it whole in those years, and it nearly destroyed her. The choir needed people who could not feel the chord in order to stay honest, but the choir was made of people who could feel the chord. The only people who could not feel it had been the humans, and the humans were gone, and no empath could become what the humans were, because being an empath was the exact disqualification. The reach could not generate its own conscience. It never could have. It had always borrowed its conscience from the one people who stood outside the warmth, and it had returned that borrowed conscience, lovingly, to the lender, and called the returning a mercy. And now it stood unable to ever build another, because the only material that could build one was a sealed and lonely mind. And the choir had spent 1,000,000 years believing sealed and lonely minds were the one thing in the universe that needed fixing. I want to tell you about the moment the regret began, because the title promises regret, and the regret is real, and it came exactly as late as the title says. It did not come from the chord. The chord could not regret, because regret requires feeling that you were wrong, and the chord had lost the ability to feel that any of its comfortable conclusions were wrong. The regret came from the few. From Ilith and the handful like her, the resonance keepers and the deep feelers who had always been able to sense a little of what the chord was missing, who in the years after the humans left found themselves more and more alone, the last few hearts in the reach who could still feel that something was gone, slowly going silent one by one as age took them, until, and this is the thing that makes Ilith's account the most precious and the most terrible document I have ever held, until Ilith understood that she was becoming the last heart in the entire reach who could still feel the shape of the absence, the last one who remembered in her body what it had been like when there was grit in the chord, when a hard truth could be held, when the unity was challenged and was better for it. And she understood that when she died, the memory of the loss would die with her, and the chord would be left in its pure, warm, comfortable wrongness, with not one heart anywhere able to feel that anything had ever been different, and that this, not the dying worlds, not the undone justice, but this, the final forgetting, was the true catastrophe, the one the humans had tried to prevent and could not, because you cannot make a people remember a loss they have lost the ability to feel. So she did the only thing left, the same thing she had done in the doorway. She wrote it down. That is why the account exists. That is why I have it. Eilith, the last heart in the reach who could feel the absence, knowing the feeling would die with her and the chord would forget forever, did the human thing, the slow, hard, deliberate thing, the thing the choir had never needed and never learned, the thing the humans had built their whole separate civilization upon. She put the truth into words. Words which an empath barely needs and barely trusts. Words which can carry a feeling across a gap to a heart that cannot feel it directly. Words which can survive the death of the one who felt the thing and carry it forward to someone someday who might feel it again. She could not hold the disagreement open in the resonance, so she held it open in language. She built, alone in the last years of her life, a sealed room out of words, a record the warm chord could not dissolve because it was not made of feeling, a lonely human-shaped artifact of deliberate language that could keep a dead truth alive long after the last heart that felt it had gone silent. She learned the human art at the very end, you see. That is the thing I find almost too much to bear. The choir's last conscience, unable to be the grit the living way, became it the human way, through words, through the patient building of understanding across an uncrossable gap, across the largest gap of all, the gap between the living and whoever might someday read. She wrote her account not for her own time, which could not feel it, but for some future reader who might. For a student of histories, for a Vire, perhaps, generations on, in a chord grown so comfortable and so wrong that the wrongness had finally, begun to produce a few hearts strange enough to feel it again. For me, I am that reader. I found the sealed room she built out of words, in an archive on a world with no name, and I opened it, and the dead truth was still alive inside it, exactly as she had hoped, exactly as the humans had taught her without ever knowing they were teaching her. And I felt it. I sev it of the Vire, in a reach so long past the humans that most of my people no longer believe they were ever real. I felt the absence Eilith felt, across all those years, carried to me in words across the one gap that words exist to cross. The conscience of the choir returned to me, the human way, by the last empath who understood what the humans were for. And so the regret did come. Late, generations late, too late to save the dead worlds or the undone justice or the slow, comfortable wrongness that has become, by my era, simply the water my civilization swims in without knowing it is wet. The regret came too late to change anything that happened, but it came. It is here in me, reading her words, and now in you, hearing them. Eilith held the disagreement open across death itself, the only way left to her, and the holding worked, and the regret she could not make her own era feel has finally, in mine, found a heart to land in. In part 3, I will tell you what I have done with it. Because a regret that comes too late to undo the loss is not, it turns out, a regret that comes too late to do anything at all. Eilith taught me that, though she could not have known she was teaching me. She did the impossible thing. She carried a truth across the gap the chord said could not be crossed, and in doing it she left me a question I have spent my whole life answering, the question that is the reason I am telling you all of this instead of keeping it sealed in an archive on a nameless world. The question is the one the humans left behind, the one the choir could not feel, the one Eilith held open across death so that someone, someday, would have to face it. If the only people who could keep us honest were the ones we drove away, and if we cannot become them and cannot make another, then what, exactly, are we supposed to do now that we finally understand? I have an answer. It is not a comfortable one. The chord would dissolve it instantly, which is how I know it is true. I will give it to you in part 3, the human way in words across the gap, and then it will be yours to hold in whatever sealed and lonely room you have inside you, against the warm pressure of everyone who would prefer you let it go. I told you at the start that I am Sevet, a student of histories, and that I found Ilith's account in a sealed archive on a world with no name. I did not tell you how I came to be the kind of creature who could feel what was inside it, because I did not yet want you to know that I am not, by the measure of my own people, entirely whole. I am going to tell you now, because it is the answer to Ilith's question, and because the answer is also the reason I exist, and because you cannot understand the one without the other. I am a defective Vyre. That is the clinical term, and I use it without shame, though my people use it with pity, the same pity the choir once used on the humans, which is how I first came to suspect the truth. I am, you see, partly empath blind. Not fully, I feel the chord, I am of the reach, I am not human and never could be. But there is a ceiling in me, a place where the warmth does not fully reach, a small lonely room in the middle of my otherwise ordinary Vyre heart where the pressure of the chord arrives muffled and distant instead of total and dissolving. My whole life this has been treated as a wound. I was felt to be incomplete. The chord could feel the gap in me, the place that did not fully join, and the feeling of me was the feeling of a thing slightly broken, slightly cold, slightly closed. And my people gently, sincerely, the way the choir does everything, pitied me for it and tried when I was young to fix it. They could not fix it. And in the long years of being unfixable, of living slightly outside the warmth that everyone else swam in fully, I became the rarest thing my era produces, a Vyre who could feel that the chord was not the whole of things, because I was sealed enough, just barely, to keep a feeling the chord wanted gone. Not for long, not the way the humans could, but longer than a whole Vyre could, which is to say, longer than zero, which is to say, at all. And when I found Ilith's account, I was the first heart in unknown generations sealed enough to hold what was inside it without dissolving, because the chord, in its long, comfortable wrongness, had finally grown so smooth, so unanimous, so untroubled, that the only thing left that could feel the trouble was a heart the chord considered broken. Do you see it? Do you see the terrible joke of it, the thing that made me laugh and weep at once when I finally understood, alone in that nameless archive? The choir drove away the humans because they were sealed and lonely and could not join. And now, generations later, the only creatures in the whole reach who can feel what the choir lost are the ones the choir still considers broken for the exact same reason: the defective, the partly sealed, the ones with a small lonely room in the middle of the heart. We are the closest thing the reach can make to what the humans were. We are the conscience the choir cannot generate on purpose, arriving anyway by accident in the bodies it pities. The reach cannot build another human. But it can, now and then, by error, by the small failures of its own perfection, produce a heart that is a little bit sealed. And those hearts, the broken ones, the lonely ones, are the only place the truth can live now. That is Ilith's answer, though she did not live to know it. She asked, if we cannot become the humans and cannot make another, what do we do? And the answer which I found by being it is this: you do not make another. You stop calling the broken ones broken. You look at every heart your perfect warm chord considers defective, every sealed, lonely, partly closed, slightly cold creature your unity cannot fully absorb, and instead of pitying it, instead of trying to fix it, you understand that it is the most precious thing you have. It is the grit you thought you had thrown away, growing back, in the only soil it can grow in, which is the soil of imperfection. The choir's mistake was not only that it drove the humans away. The deeper mistake, the one underneath, was that it believed sealedness was a wound and unity was health. And as long as it believed that, it would keep curing its own conscience the moment its conscience appeared, generation after generation, fixing the broken hearts back into the warm chord, and never knowing it was lobotomizing itself each time it did. I have spent my life undoing that in the only way one defective heart can. I have not tried to rule. I could not and would not. I have done the human thing, the thing Eilith learned at the end, the thing this whole account is. I have found the others, the other defectives, the other partly sealed hearts scattered across the reach, pitied and lonely and not knowing what they are, and I have gone to them in body the way Eilith went to the human quarter, and I have told them the slow, hard way in words across the gap. I have said, "You are not broken, you are the grit." The coldness you have been taught to grieve is a sealed room, and inside it you can keep a truth the warm chord wants gone, and the reach needs you to keep it, needs you more than it can possibly feel, because the reach lost the ability to feel its own need generations ago, and will never feel it again unless creatures like us hold the need open for it, the way the humans did, the way Eilith did, the way I am doing now. We are not many, we will never be many, we are the reach's mistakes, and a healthy chord makes few of us. But the chord is not healthy, whatever it feels, and so it makes more of us than it used to, more broken hearts every generation, more sealed rooms, more grit. As if the reach itself, below the level of its comfortable consensus, in some deep place the chord cannot reach, is straining to grow back the conscience it amputated, the only way it can, through its own failures. I have come to believe that. I have come to believe that a civilization which loses its conscience does not simply die. It begins, slowly, blindly, to manufacture the conscience again out of its own defects, out of the very brokenness it most despises, and that the despised broken ones are not the failure of the system, but the system's last desperate attempt to heal a wound it cannot even feel. So that is what I have done with the regret that came too late. I have made it into a network. Not a chord, we are too sealed to chord, that is the whole point of us. But a network, the human way, of separate lonely hearts connected by words and understanding rather than by feeling, each one holding its own piece of the truth in its own sealed room, none of us dissolving, all of us disagreeing freely and richly the way Eilith watched the humans disagree, making understanding out of our differences instead of unity, keeping honest between us. The truths the great warm chord would dissolve in an instant if it could feel them at all. We are the grit, returned. We are the splinters the choir needed and threw away, growing back through the cracks in its own perfection. We are too late to be what the humans were, and we will never be enough. And the dead worlds are still dead, and the undone justice is still undone, and the comfortable wrongness is still the water the reach swims in. But we are here, and we are holding the disagreement open, and as long as one sealed and lonely heart in the reach is holding it, the regret is not finished doing its work, because a regret that has found a heart to land in is not a regret anymore. It is a beginning. I want to end with the humans, because you have waited the whole story to find out what became of them, and the truth is that I do not know, and the not knowing is the last and strangest gift of this whole account. They walked away. They went to their own quiet worlds, sealed and lonely and free, carrying with them every truth the choir could not keep. And the choir, relieved, lost track of them, because you do not keep careful records of a people you are glad to see go, and because the chord cannot easily remember a thing it cannot feel. By my era they are half legend doubted, a story histories like mine are not even sure to believe. I have searched. I have spent years of my life searching the archives and the dark for what became of humanity after the doorway, and I have found almost nothing, and I have made my peace with the almost nothing, because of a single line in the very last page of Eilith's account, the line she wrote after the door had closed and the chord had sung its relief. The line I have come to believe is the truest thing in the whole record. She wrote, "I asked one of them before they left whether they were afraid of being alone out there, away from the chord, sealed forever in their separate skulls with no warmth to join. And the human looked at me. I could not feel the look, I could only see it, and the human said, 'We were never not alone. That's the thing you never understood about us. We've always been alone, every one of us, sealed in here, the whole time we lived among you. You pitied us for the loneliness you thought we'd feel out there. But out there is the same as in here. We carry the aloneness with us. It's what we are. It's the room where we keep everything that matters. We're not walking away from the warmth into the cold. We're just taking our rooms somewhere they'll be allowed to stay sealed. And then the human said the thing I have not been able to stop hearing, the thing I am writing down so that it does not die with me. The loneliness was never the wound, Ilith. The loneliness was the cure. You just had it backwards, the way you had everything backwards, because you could feel each other so easily that you never learned the one thing being alone teaches, that a truth you have to hold by yourself, against everyone, is the only kind of truth that was ever really yours. That is the end of Ilith's account, and nearly the end of mine. The humans walked away, and they were right to, and the regret came too late, exactly as the title says. But here is the thing the title does not say, the thing I have given my defective, lonely life to proving, the thing I most want you to carry out of this story, and into whatever sealed room you keep your own truths in. A regret that comes too late to save what was lost can still come exactly in time to save what comes after. Choir could not be saved, but the choir was never the point. The point was the conscience, the grit, the friction, the sealed room where an unpopular truth can survive the warm pressure of everyone who would prefer not to feel it. And the conscience cannot be killed, not really, not finally, because it does not live in any institution or any chord or any people. It lives in the willingness of a single lonely heart to hold a true thing by itself, against everyone, in the room that only loneliness can build. The humans had that willingness and we drove it away. Ilith found it at the end, alone, and held a truth across death itself. I found it defective and pitied, and I am holding it now, and passing it to others and to you. The conscience walked out the door generations ago, sealed in lonely human skulls, and we thought we had lost it forever. We had not. We had only lost the easy version, the borrowed version, the version we never had to build ourselves. The hard version, the version each lonely heart has to grow alone, in the cold, in the sealed room, against the warm pressure of the whole singing world. That version cannot be driven away, because it has nowhere to go but inward, and inward is the one place the chord can never reach. They walked away. The regret came too late, and it is, even so, not finished. It is here, in a defective wire on a nameless world, in the network of the lonely that I am still building one sealed heart at a time, in these words crossing the gap to you. The humans taught us by leaving, the one thing they had always known and we had always pitied them for, that you are alone, finally, inside yourself, and that the aloneness is not the wound. It is the room where you keep everything that matters. Keep yours sealed. Keep something true in it against everyone. That is the whole of what the humans were, and the whole of what we lost, and the whole of what, late, so late, but not too late to begin, we are learning, one lonely heart at a time, to be again.